Hello, Short Course fans. This is Chris, and we are at session 12. I feel like I say this all the time, but this session is jam-packed with so much, really critical church social teaching. This whole section of the Catechism, part 3 of the 4 parts, is really powerful. And hopefully you're feeling that as well, how our faith translates into moral and social decision making is really critical. It's, if our faith is all about learning how to love God and love each other, which it is, okay, that's really what it boils down to. Then how our faith translates into life in the world in which we live is critical. So hopefully you're seeing that, you're appreciating that as much as I am. Let us begin in prayer and then get right into it this week. So in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, today we're actually going to dig into the commandments, and thank you so much for not just the guidance that you give us in how we can really become the best versions of ourselves. But thank you again for all the great thinkers that have preceded us, that have really dug into your revelation and given us a greater understanding of what it means for us and how we can better lead our lives to achieve beatitude, to realize the happiness that you intend for all of us. Just want to thank you for that, and we ask that you give us insights and wisdom and all that kind of good stuff that we need to more fully understand our faith, and give us patience as well as we work through what is just literally a couple of millennia worth of thinking and brilliance and understanding put down on paper. Again, thank you so much. Amen. And of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So today we're biting off a pretty big chunk. About 250 paragraphs, so one of the largest, at least by number of paragraph sections that we've covered. I think we'll be able to get through it in a reasonable amount of time. Just to review, last time we were together, we started on life in Christ. That's part 3 of the 4 parts of the Catechism. And we started getting some of that foundational information about what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to live in a society? What is it, what are our obligations as individuals and as members of a community, and how that all plays out. Then we dug into law and grace, starting with the moral law, talking about the natural moral law that's written on all of our hearts, that has been known to every civilization in history. And then we talked about God coming and kind of delineating that for us, and at least with the chosen people, the people of Israel, the Hebrew people, how he gave them additional laws to help them really begin to understand they're not part of this world, and to separate themselves and really exercise faith and start to build some of those habits. And then we talked about the new law, the law that Jesus Christ brought, which doesn't replace the old law. It does fulfill large chunks of it. It does actually extend it to its natural next stages. So again, it's not something where he came in and said, okay, all that's wasted. What he's saying is, okay, we're done with spring. It's time for, and now that we're in season, here's what you need to know to be successful. So again, we talked about that. We talked about justification quite a bit, and grace and merit. And these are really important things, especially when you're getting into discussions between Catholic Christians, the original Christians, and other Christian ecclesial communities, those communities that separated from us about 1,500 years into the Christian experience. Those would be the communities of what is called the Reformation. I think it's more aptly called the Revolution in the 1500s, so the 16th century. And just the differences between our views on free will and predestination and what it means to be justified, and the role of grace. And we discussed how, to a large extent, we actually do believe the same things, but there's a couple of very critical differences, especially around free will and predestination. And again, because Protestantism is so diverse now and continues to split and fracture, there isn't a single Protestant view there that you can point to and contrast to the singular Catholic view. So unfortunately, we're trying to compare and contrast a multitude of what is now today's Protestantism with a singularity, which is today's Catholicism. But we did get some good discussion there, and hopefully got a better understanding of what we believe. We talked about the role of the church in our moral life. And again, you see some recurring themes. We talked about the role of magisterium several times now in the course of these first dozen sessions. But we did talk about, what role that the church does play in the understanding and teaching on morality. And then we started digging into the second section of this part of the catechism on the Ten Commandments, and talked about, what are the Ten Commandments? Where did they come from? How are they related? One of the important points there was they are such a unity. To violate one means you're violating all, for the most part. And it kind of makes sense. The first three commandments being about love of God, the next seven being about love of neighbor, two things that actually can't be separated. So to violate love of neighbor is to violate love of God, and to violate love of God generally means an insult to his progeny, your neighbor. So again, we talked about that, and we talked about the role of grace, specifically around how, it was very difficult for the Hebrew people to live up to what was defined for them in the Mosaic law. And it's unfortunate in a lot of ways. They had the law, but they didn't have the means to really hope to abide by it and grow into it and grow deeper through it. And we are very lucky. Okay, so we can look back and say, I can't believe they didn't get it. Well, they didn't have some of the advantages we have. Jesus gave us several advantages, not just saving us from sin and death and giving us the hope that there is going to be more, but giving us the liturgy and the sacraments as the ordinary means of accessing his grace, something that prior to Jesus' arrival, the chosen people did not have. So next time you're going back and reviewing their behavior and how could they keep failing and how could they keep abandoning God, you have to understand that we do the same thing today, and we have all these additional gifts, which should make it much easier for us to live the best version of ourselves, and we still fail on doing it. So we talked about that. Today, we are going to get into the Ten Commandments themselves, and we're going to start with the three commandments around love of God, okay? So you shall have no other gods before me, keep holy the name of the Lord, and keep holy the Sabbath day. And then we'll get into the first two of love of neighbor, okay? Honor mother and father, and then do not kill, okay? Probably one of the, strangely enough, least understood of all the commandments, or least understood from the point of view of people really getting its depth and its meaning. So we're going to spend some time in that one today, for sure. Anyway, let's dig in. I'm just going to pause for a moment so I can get a sip of coffee, and then we'll get rolling. I do want to give you a warning. I have my dogs with me today. One of them is a beagle, so when he hears outside noise, he will start to howl. I will have to put this recording on pause, no doubt, a couple of times. I apologize for that. But I can't leave them outside because we have an outside predator issue at the moment. So seems like I'm kind of stuck. So hopefully it won't be too disruptive. But I'm going to pause for a moment, and then we will start to dig in. Okay, so the Ten Commandments, starting off with, you shall love the Lord your God above all others. I think you know it. I've asked you to review the Ten Commandments as they appear in both Deuteronomy and Exodus. So I'm pretty sure you're familiar with these, so I'm not going to go in ad infinitum through all the detail, but you can always open those up and take another look at them. But again, it really means several things, starting with, we should worship our Lord God. God is worthy of worship. We should give him that worship. We are created beings. So our entire existence depends on his being and his free will choice to create us. So, we are owed nothing, we have earned nothing. We were created out of love for love. with no expectation in return. So, Jesus talks about this in the Gospels, and he's quoting. He's quoting a piece of Deuteronomy called the Shema. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, with all your mind. And again, he's echoing the Shema, which begins, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." And, the important point here is, God loved us first. He took the decisive action to create us, to offer us his being, to invite us into his family. And really what the commandments are doing, especially these first three, are reminding us that the natural and appropriate and proper response to that invitation to existence would be to worship our Lord, to respect our Lord, to make sure that we are living our lives according to the framework that he laid out, that is designed to give us the best opportunity of success. Okay. So again, we're created in God's image and likeness, something that we've been talking about forever. It's interesting in this little section 284, 286, we get a reference to St. Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho. I would suggest, if you're looking for an interesting apologetic read, an ancient interesting apologetic read for the Catholic faith, this is an excellent one. Where Justin Martyr uses philosophical arguments, but a depth of knowledge of the Old Testament in what is a pseudo dialogue with Trypho, who theoretically is a rabbi of the age. No clear definition of whether Trypho is a real person, yes or no. And it is pretty clear from the writing of this document that Justin Martyr is at very least taking some liberties, because he does an extensive job in quoting himself and not so much in quoting Trypho, but it's still a very valuable document. And that's why I've highlighted there. It's one of those really interesting reads. And there's a section of it that's quoted in paragraph 2085. And really what, again, Justin is doing is creating a great apologetic argument for Christianity. And he's trying to make that argument to, in this case, Trypho, who would be a leading Jewish rabbi. Right? So again, we're called to live as God's children, or made in his image and likeness, which means, that first commandment, you shall love your God with all your heart. That means we have to embrace faith. We have to then embrace the hope that is future faith, and then the love that comes out of having both present and future faith. Faith and hope will lead us to love of God, love of neighbor. And again, we have to accept that, God is God and we are not. So having faith in him is not only just, it's the only thing that actually makes any sense. To deny faith in God, to deny that he is worthy of our respect, worthy of our worship, worthy of our adoration, worthy of us listening to him, is really to just, buck logic altogether. He created us for no purpose other than to love us. He has the only unconditional love that we will ever experience. So to doubt his motives, to doubt his intentions for us, really is illogical on so many levels. We start talking about, again, faith, hope, and charity. Charity meaning love, again, in the religious sense. Again, our moral lives, everything that we do has its source in faith. Okay, so there's sins that we can make against faith. So if loving God is demonstrating that faith, hope, and charity, there are some sins against faith: involuntary doubt, voluntary doubt. So you're like, what's the difference? Involuntary is you're suffering from some form of invincible ignorance. You don't actually know any better. Hence, it's, doubt could come from a lack of knowledge. Voluntary doubt is you do know, and you're choosing, no, I'm not buying it. Okay. I'm choosing to either believe that God is wrong or that God does not exist. And then there's incredulity, heresy, apostasy, and schism. Incredulity is something that many of us suffer from. It's actually sort of picking and choosing certain doctrines of the faith that we just don't want to buy into. Okay. Heresy is actually the obstinate denial of a dogmatic truth. So it's very hard to be a heretic. It's very easy to be incredulous. Okay. And many of us, myself included from time to time, have been and will be incredulous. Heretics were probably not likely to be that. That's the obstinate denial, post-baptismal denial of a dogmatic truth, something revealed by God himself. Apostasy is rejecting all of it. So I'm just saying there's nothing right about Christianity. I'm apostating. The whole thing I'm throwing out. So it's not a selection, it's you're throwing out everything. Versus schism just means I am leaving the authority of the church. I am doubting that authority. I am not recognizing that authority. I'm separating myself. So if you go back to our early reformers, the revolutionaries, Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, King Henry VIII, they were certainly incredulous, which led them in many cases to be heretics because they obstinately denied dogmatic truths. They certainly went into schism, but they never apostatized because they still believed in Christianity. They still believed in most of the fundamental truths of the faith. So they started out as incredulous, navigated to heresy, and became schismatic, but not apostatizers. Hope, which is just, that beautiful gift that we get, that there's more than what we're experiencing here now, that there is another life, the life we're meant to live, that's an eternal life, and we're immortal. It's that confident expectation that we'll be able to live that life with God. So it's really future faith. I love the description of hope as future faith. Okay, so faith is I believe now in my present circumstance. Hope is I then, as a result of that, move forward and believe in something else for the future, something that is greater, something that is just wonderful. And then charity, the last of the three theological virtues, it just talks about how we must love God. He is due that love. And that because he is God and he created all of the rest of us creatures, that is why we need to love each other as well. Every creature was created by God to be good, in some cases, very good. So to choose not to love them, and love again is a choice, would be a violation or a rejection of God himself. And again, the idea here is you shall only love God, okay? Which means you have to love yourself less. So I love when we talk about what this means. Well, it's adoration, it's prayer, it's sacrifice. Well, yeah, it's humbling oneself. It's recognizing that you're not God, he is. It's using prayer to communicate with God, to ask for his support, to ask for his help and grace so that we can live the lives we're meant to live and obey his commandments. It's giving him praise, giving and asking him to help us and others, and asking others to intercede on our behalf. So prayer is a very important part of this love of God. And then sacrifice. When we love somebody, we choose to love someone, it inevitably means we're going to sacrifice something of ourselves, something of our own wants and desires for the good of the other. And we as finite beings, as broken beings, our sacrifices for God are imperfect at best. Christ made that perfect sacrifice on our behalf, the perfect being creating a perfect sacrifice. And what we can now do is we can unify our sacrifice to that of Christ, and we do that each and every time we celebrate the Mass, and we should be doing that, so that we can make our lives and the sacrifices we make a viable offering to God. Okay, so again, a lot wrapped up into this first commandment, a lot of peripheral understanding of our faith. Again, this section of the Catechism talks about vows, and being careful about vows. Vows are good. It's a promise to God to do and bring even a better good. So in the case of, for example, religious brothers and sisters who take the evangelical counsels, a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience, or even our diocesan priests who take the vows of poverty, of chastity and obedience. They don't actually vow poverty as a diocesan priest, although they often do live in poverty. That is not a specific promise that they will make. We talked about how important it is if we're going to make vows, or this section talks about how important it is to make vows, to not make them lightly, but then if you are going to make them, then really stick with them and let that be a part of you reaching the best version of yourself. This section also has a really interesting discussion on, there's a duty towards religion. We're all bound to seek the truth. So God planted the moral compass on us. We know there is a God. Now it's our obligation to seek the truth, to say, well, I believe in God, but I don't know anything about him and I don't really care. That's not loving God. That's not giving God his due. Giving him his due is trying to better understand him, to deepen your relationship with him. And, respect for that is important. Different people are going to do it different ways. So respect for religious freedom is important because we want everyone to be free to pursue God in the way that is best fit for them. Ideally, we'd like to expose them to the fullness of the truth that's present in the Catholic faith, because we believe and know that gives you the best opportunity for salvation. But we're never going to force anyone to act against their convictions or to act against their conscience in pursuing this religious understanding of the truth. Again, this first commandment clearly teaches us that we can have no other gods in front of God. So traditionally, wealth, power, carnal satisfaction and pleasure, these are things that we will sometimes put in front of God. Fame, fame and fortune, they become our gods. It's very not too often these days that you have people, worshiping the pig god or whatever god they want to create. They actually make things of this world their gods and pursue them to their own detriment. They pursue them at the cost of all other goods, which is putting something before God. So that's a problem. We also know that our church teaches a superstition, irreligion. This is not something that we want to get involved in. And too often we can get sucked into superstition. I mean, I myself wear and have a number of religious medals. I tend to use them to remind me of the person that is referenced on it, or whose image is on it. But in this case, I had the Miraculous Medal, which clearly has an image of Mary on it. But the Miraculous Medal has a number of promises that come with it. And again, that's private revelation. You don't have to believe it. And it can actually, if you're not careful, it could actually, cross that border into superstition, where you believe, oh yeah, as long as I'm wearing the medal, I die, I'm good. And that would be a superstitious belief. That would be saying that this medal has some sort of magic, talisman that has special powers in of itself, and that's not the case. Okay, so again, we have to be careful about going into that area of superstition, because again, that's as bad as having other gods in your life. And idolatry, again, we talk about that. So superstition, it's giving things some sort of power they do not have. So it's to believe that they are doing something or can do something when they themselves can do nothing. Okay, it is always God acting. Okay, and maybe they serve as a reminder to ask for God's actions, which is wonderful. But be careful about superstition, and then also obviously be careful about idolatry, putting any other creature or created thing in front of the one true God. We also want to be on guard against belief in divinization and magic. So, and the reason for this, calling on the dead, trying to seek information, trying to see the future. This is saying I don't trust in God's providential plan, and I want to know. Okay, And curiosity is interesting, very powerful. It can kill the cat, as they say, and it can kill us, because when you start trying to seek foreknowledge, you are basically saying, God, I kind of intellectually know you're all good and your plan is nothing but good for me, but I'd really like to know what that plan is. Okay, just to be sure. So that again would be putting something in front of God. And irreligion is sort of, and I think I've been involved in this in my life. It's actually scoffing at religion. It's tempting God. We saw the devil do that to Jesus. It's saying, "Hey, God, if you're really there, then give me a Lamborghini." Okay, these are things that when you say them out loud, they are clearly ridiculous, but that would be tempting God. That would be saying, "Hey, you have to meet my test. You have to do what I am asking to demonstrate your worthiness of my adoration," which is just nuts. We adore God because He created us, for no other reason. That would be good enough, right? So sacrilege is taking it the next step, and that's really taking the things of God. Could be His church, could be images of saints, could be holy items, and really not treating them with the respect that is due, sort of scoffing at them, sort of making fun of them. That's called sacrilege. And then simony, or simony, depending upon how you like to pronounce it. Again, a great sign of irreligion. Okay. And that's buying or selling of spiritual things, as if you can buy or sell spiritual things, and that's not true. Okay. People tend to sometimes get caught up in that. It's very related to superstition. They have a superstitious belief, and then someone else has decided to take advantage of that superstitious belief, potentially by selling them something religious that they superstitiously believe is going to alter their lives. So again, all these things kind of encroach on that first commandment of having no other God. And also having trust in God. That's kind of what that means, is trust in the one God. Love Him, adore Him, thank Him. Don't worry about what's to come. Put your trust in His providential plan. Other things that obviously are bad: atheism, agnosticism. Again, atheism bad for a number of reasons. Okay, clearly, you're not believing in God at all. All right, so you're rejecting that bond between God and man, and certainly rejecting religion, or at least theological religion. Okay, because I think atheism is in many ways its own religion. It mimics to a great extent religious belief, or at least the zeal of religious belief. Agnosticism, in some ways, is actually a little worse. Okay, I think there's a God out there, but I'm just not sure, and I don't think I'll ever know, and I don't think it's possible to know. And again, that can lead to indifferentism, where whatever, do whatever you want, it's all good. You have faith, that's great. You're Buddhist, that's great. You're Muslim, that's great. You're Christian, awesome. Makes no difference. And that is wrong. That's not seeking a truth. That's just saying, I'm just too lazy to care, and I'm going to be just sort of straddling the fence and hope all you guys can work things out. So not good. So atheism, agnosticism, obviously violations of that first commandment. And then the last part of this, and you see this with in the Protestant world quite a bit, they actually make this a separate commandment, not to make a graven image. We've put it all as part of the first commandment. And they've taken it in some cases to an extreme, saying you can't portray anything in picture form, at least inside a place of religious worship or in connection to religious worship. And by the way, when God first revealed Himself, that would have made sense. Okay. However, even though God put this prohibition on with the Hebrew people, He Himself violated it, with the bronze serpent, the Ark of the Covenant, the cherubim that are part of that. So again, he wasn't saying that veneration of images is wrong. What He was really trying to get at is, don't make them idols. Don't make an in object or an image of an item more than it is. It's just an image that represents what it is an image of. So, don't go crazy and ascribe to it something beyond that. And when we venerate images, as we often do in the Catholic Church, what we're doing is we're not venerating the image itself, but we're venerating the prototype, the real thing that the image was created out of. So again, very important to understand that there's no such thing as a statue or a picture or what have you that we are going to reverence in any way, shape, or form other than as its representation of the person it depicts, whether it be Mary or Joseph or Jesus or any of the great saints. And I think there was a in brief there, yes. So the in brief on that first commandment, there's a lot in that first commandment, by the way. I didn't really find much of anything actually in that in brief section I thought stood out to me. I would suggest you go back and review that section pretty well. There's just a lot jam-packed into "you shall have no other gods before me" and what that means. And for example, it probably doesn't come to your mind right away that the prohibition against divinization and fortune telling would be associated with that commandment, but they certainly are. So just be aware of that and go back and review this section a little bit, and I think it'll solidify it in your mind. So with that, let's move on to the second commandment. The name of the Lord is holy. Do not take the Lord's name in vain, as we say, okay? And again, that comes from the Exodus version, Exodus 20.7 or :7. And again, it's just saying, hey, be careful, all right? And I love this line in the middle here. The gift of a name belongs to the order of trust and intimacy. And this is something we've lost sense of. In ancient cultures and in most cultures up until our current modern culture, the offering of your name to someone is a tremendous gift. It's inviting them into a relationship. And God has given us, he's offered us his name, okay? I am Yahweh. And that's an invitation into an intimate relationship, and we should not abuse that. So we should not, take that name and use it in a disrespectful or playful manner. Imagine, and by the way, we see it today, the whole Karen thing or the Brandon thing, which if you're watching this outside of 2023, 2024, may not make any sense to you. But we tend to start making fun of people or making fun of a name, and it has a detrimental effect. It's actually lowering our reverence for that person, our respect for that person, which means by default, it's taking them down a peg in dignity. And we never want to do that with God. We always want to treat God and his name with the utmost respect, okay? Again, when we are speaking poorly about God, and his name and complaining about God, we are not doing him the justice that is due in any way, shape, or form. So again, don't make false oaths. Don't use God's name in trivial manners. As a matter of fact, just don't toss it around without a care, because basically what you're saying is, it's not that important. It's just a word. Actually, it's more than just a word. This is the representation of God, a name he gave us to invite him into intimate relationship with him. So be careful about that. It's just a word. I can toss it around. And be careful about your own name. As we're baptized in the Catholic Church, we should have been given a name that has Christian origins. Hopefully we all were. And we should make sure that we're respecting each other's names, respecting each other's personal identifier, because again, that's what we use to invite someone into a relationship, and you never want to devalue someone's name. So see the in brief there on the second commandment. Again, second 2161. Second commandment enjoins respect for the Lord's name. The name of the Lord is holy. It's set apart. It should be put over here and not played around with and not be lumped in with other things in our lives. It's that important, that relationship. And then 2162 is just talking about, how this commandment forbids the the improper use of the Lord's name. So that will bring us on to the third commandment. I'm just going to take a quick break and I'll be back with you in a moment. All right, that third commandment, I'm trying to use the mechanical commands to stop and start the recording, and apparently they don't work. So sorry about the little delays there as I start and stop. I guess you only see it as I stop, but I apologize for that. So keep holy the Sabbath. Okay, this is an important one. All right. God rested on that last day. So he created for 6 and then he rested. And he gave instructions to his chosen people. They too should rest. Okay. So he entrusted the Sabbath rest to Israel as a sign of their covenant relationship. Just to remind them, hey, they are his and he is theirs. And again, it was set apart for the praise of God, whether it be his work in creation, all of his saving actions. And again, it's to remind us that what God did for us, we should be modeling, we should be discipling that. Just like, and again, this is specifically in reference to Christ and how he lived his life. If we're going to do that, well, just like God was refreshed and rested on that seventh day, we should also rest. Okay, so that's the Sabbath, as Jesus said, was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so it wasn't that God said, "Hey, I want you to rest and focus on this day," because it was for him. He really does this for us. So it's the day we should put our everyday work aside. It's a great day not to be pursuing wealth and fame and fortune, but to be spending time with family and friends in community. And the Jewish people celebrated their Sabbath on a Saturday. We have not replaced or moved the Sabbath. It's still on Saturday. But we as Christians are going to celebrate our day of rest on Sunday. And the reason for that is it's a day that Jesus rose from the dead. As a matter of fact, we consider every Sunday a little Easter. Okay. So every time we go to Mass, every time we go to Mass, every time we participate in Mass, we are participating in a little Easter. And we do that on the Lord's Day because tradition has had it from the very beginning. That's the day the apostles celebrated and did in remembrance of Jesus what he commanded them to do, which is celebrate the Eucharist. And we think of that resurrection as this is a new creation. So the old creation is gone. We have a new creation now, ushered in by Christ's resurrection, deserving of a different day for rest from unnecessary work and for worship and for community engagement and things of that nature, which is what God wants us to do as his beloved sons and daughters. It is very different than the Sabbath. So people have this idea that, we changed the Sabbath. We didn't actually. We still recognize that the Jewish Sabbath is on Saturday, and that's wonderful. What we're saying is that we're choosing to worship and celebrate and give thanksgiving to the Lord on Sunday in commemoration of Jesus's resurrection. The third commandment does not tell you what day of the week you should keep holy. It just says the Sabbath. So in a lot of ways, Christianity has created a different Sabbath, but has not revoked the original Saturday Sabbath that is at the heart of the Jewish people's celebratory activities. And just like that's the heart for them, Sunday is the heart for us. And we all have the obligation, just because out of love of God, to spend some time with God in the Mass. And we can encounter him there, 4 different ways. Through the priest acting in his person, in persona Christi, through each other, we all are tabernacles of the living God, through his word, which is proclaimed and then explained to us from the ambo, and certainly through his real substantial presence in the Eucharist, on the altar, and then eventually with us in the reception of Holy Communion. So we do have that obligation to celebrate, okay, and participate in the holy sacrifice of the Mass on Sundays, because that is our central element of our faith. The source and summit is indeed the Eucharist. So that's what makes us distinctly Catholic, or the most important thing that makes us distinctly Catholic, I should probably say. So we are bound to participate in Mass, and to deliberately choose not to participate in Mass is basically an offense of the third commandment. It's basically saying, yeah, I know you told me to keep the day holy, and I know the tradition has been that we do this by adhering to Jesus's command, God's command, to do this in remembrance of him, but I'm going to do something else anyway. I just feel, pulled in a different direction. So again, third commandment, a lot going on there, and that ties back to meeting that first precept of the church, which is to participate in Mass every Sunday and holy day of obligation. And when we do have that Sunday, it's not just participating in Mass and you're done, but it really is a day that's supposed to be rest and leisure. It's time for us to get together as families, as larger communities, and really, embrace the fact that we're here, that God created us, that we are 1.x billion brothers and sisters, all linked together through a common faith, through a common celebration of the Eucharist, through the common sacrament. So again, that Lord's Day just reminds us to bring all that to bear. And if I look at the in brief, I like 2190 because it kind of really differentiates between the Sabbath and Sunday. The Sabbath, which represented the completion of the first creation, has been replaced by Sunday, which recalls the new creation, inaugurated by the resurrection of Christ. So again, it does replace it for us, for Christians, not for the Jewish people. The Jewish people still, as they are operating under the Old Covenant, are required to keep that Saturday Sabbath. 2192, Sundays to be observed as the foremost holy day of obligation. So I believe we currently have 6 holy days of obligation. But what the Catechism is telling you is Sunday is the holiest of holy days of obligation, in which case you have 52 more that are quite important, the most important. So we should not miss Sunday Mass. 2193, we should abstain from labors and business concerns, which impedes us from giving right worship to God. So anything that pulls us away from right worship to God, from right participation in communal experiences, that has to be blown away. Okay, so look, some of us are going to be stuck in jobs where we're on shifts, and we're occasionally going to have to work on perhaps both days of the weekend, and won't be able to reflect, okay, this day of rest and this reverence and give God his due. And that may be necessary to support your family. Totally get it. God totally gets it. But for those of us, which are the vast majority of us, which that is not the case, we need to make sure that we are indeed putting aside that day for adoration, petition, worship, thanksgiving of God, and then communing with our fellow brothers and sisters, and just sharing in a day of rest, sharing in a day of basking in this wonderful world that God created for us. So again, that's all important, and that's what you get out of the brief. And again, I'm going to take another pause, and we'll move on to the 4th commandment. Okay, so let us move on to the 4th commandment, honoring mother and father. So we've moved away from the commandments of love of God, and we're talking about no other gods before him, keep holy his name, the respect for his name, and the fact that he created us, and then keep holy the Sabbath, recognizing the Sabbath was created for us, not us for the Sabbath. So God isn't asking us to do something because it benefits him. He's asking us to do it because it benefits us. So it's a weird thing. Love of God still turns back to a benefit for us, okay? So he's saying, hey, if you love me, you're going to do these things. And by the way, these are things that are good for you, okay? So it's love of self while you love of God. But now we're going to get into what can often be the more difficult commandments, the love of neighbor commandments. starting right off with number 4, which is honor your mother and father. And again, these are in a specific order. So we're loving God first, we're honoring God first. And then the first commandment he gives us afterwards, when it talks about love of neighbor, love of your fellow man, it's honor mother and father. And I think, the reason for that is very clear. We should honor them merely for giving us life. They participated with God in the creation of life. And even if they were lousy parents, they did that. And it's funny, I struggled with this one for a while, not because my parents were not good parents, they're very good parents. But I just said, yeah, but if you had really lousy parents, this could be tough. And I guess it's because I did not put the proper value on life itself, because I was like, well, they didn't give me much. And it's like, yeah, they give you life. Okay. And maybe after that they failed. All right. But without life, you have nothing. So they gave you the most important thing you can get, which is your life. And I think that's what we're trying to, or that's what the church is saying here, is what God has tried to convey to us. He's given them the position of our earthly parents, our earthly fathers. He says, hey, the authority, they deserve the respect and honor. And then we also believe this extends to all those people in our lives that are in positions of authority, whose role it is to help us grow and mature and become the best version of ourselves. So from that perspective, you can extend that to teachers and coaches and your boss at work even, okay? Who theoretically, if they're a good boss, if they're a good supervisor, a good manager, is trying to make you a better version of yourself. So again, this commandment is pretty wide scoping. Certainly focus on mom and dad and giving them the respect that is due, which also means that we have an obligation for their care when they can no longer care for themselves. Regardless of whether they were great or not, because they gave us the most important gift anyone can give you, which is the gift of life. Important that this section also starts talking about a number of things like the family and God's plan, and it makes a really interesting point. Yes, God created the human family, mother, father, children. And there's certainly a hierarchy of authority there, but it does not mean that everyone isn't equal in dignity. We're all sons and daughters of God, which means even though there's a hierarchy of authority in the family, we all must respect each other, because we do all bear that equal and powerful dignity as being created in the image and likeness of God. And I think that's important, because sometimes we can forget that. I know that I, as a parent, sometimes forget that, or had forgotten that. And it is important to remind myself that, hey, my children are sons and daughters of God, no different than I am, and they are deserving of my respect. Okay. So again, equal dignity. And I think I have a repeat. Let me fix that repeat. I'm going to pause for a moment. Hate when I do that. There we go. The beauty of technology. Just cut it right out. Cut out the duplicate. So again, the other thing the church teaches is how important that family is. Okay. Giving it the name, the domestic church. And again, it's important because it's the place where we're really going to first be fed the faith. It's the place where we're first going to see models of the faith. And that's because it is a representation of that intimate communion between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So the family, very important. We know how important it is in society, but God is recognizing it's important. He's created this family unit to be that model of communion that we can actually live in, reference to as we work our way into ultimate communion with Him. As indeed a family, his own family of communion. Very important, and church teaches how important it is to protect the family, the original cell of social life. It should be made it clear that the family needs to be supported and not interrupted, not endangered, not belittled. Family life and the survival of society go hand in hand, and the church wants that to be very clear. And I think we're all fairly clear on it, but some people have actually thought let's destroy the family. It holds people back. We should be more of a communal super family as opposed to individual nuclear families. And that is something the church will fight against. The church believes this model, this cellular family, this nuclear family, is actually the key to successful civilization, successful growth, successful education. Okay. And civil authorities should have an obligation to protect and foster the success of the family unit. Children, the duties of children, respect for parents. Okay, yes, because they brought us into the world. Um, and that respect should be the lifelong. Okay. Again, even if our parents were not the best parents, all right, and as long as we are living under their roof, the church says, hey, while you are living under the roof of your parents, you need to obey them. Okay. Um, unless they're obviously asking you to do something that's morally corrupt, but you're going to live by their rules, and make sure you give them that respect. And then, that obedience may change when you're no longer under their roof, when you're emancipated and out on your own. But that respect will always be there. That special gratitude should always be there, again, because without them, you do not live. And without life, there is no other right. There is no other benefit, right? And again, it just reiterates here, this should be extended to all those people that are helping you grow in faith and love and understanding, other members of your family, pastors, catechists, teachers, friends, anyone who's in that role of helping you become the best version of yourself, that's due to mothers and fathers. And parents have part of the other side of this commandment is that this comes with obligatory responsibilities for parents as well. They are, the first educators. As a matter of fact, their role is irreplaceable. I teach this to all the parents that enroll their kids in our faith formation programs, simply because I'm like, look, I can help, but you're still going to be the key. If you expect to just drop them off and pick them up and everything's going to be wonderful from the faith perspective, that's a huge mistake, because there is no replacement for what parents can teach, what parents can share, what parents can model. Okay. And parents not only have that responsibility, they have that right. And it's primordial and inalienable, which means they can't give it up themselves and it can't be taken away from them. So you can't choose not to live up to it. That's an inalienable right. You have to do this, parents. But the same token, no one can take that away from you, right? Again, respect your children, and earliest possible age, start teaching them everything they need to know in life, about this life and about the next life, which means education in faith. And then goes on and talks about how as children mature, that parents also have this special obligation to help their children identify their vocation in life, whether it be a vocation to married life or single life or religious life, what have you. Parents have an obligation to encourage that, to help their children discern that, and then to support whatever that discernment comes up with. And unfortunately, I unfortunately get to too often see parents that do not really support that. They have a in their own mind what they believe their children should be and what their vocation should be, and they really attempt to push their children down that path rather than trying to help their children discern what path is right for them. So again, the church teaches that's really what we have to do. We have to help our children discern the path and then support them in that discernment and ultimately their decision-making process. There is a tie to this to authorities in civil society. We kind of touched on that last time we were together. But again, they have received, in a way, parental authority over a community, and we need to respect that. That comes from God. So we need to respect those governmental leaders who are helping in organizing the social structure and maintaining the peace and equity and justice in the social structure in which we find ourselves. We're obligated to respect them. And we then, as part of that communal family, have an obligation to contribute, submit ourselves to to legal authority, things of that nature, to pay taxes, to vote, to defend one's country. These are all things that actually are tied into, in great respect, the fourth commandment and honoring mother and father. Now we're actually honoring the mother and father of our extended social family, which is the community in which we live. And again, these just like parents have responsibilities towards their children, our authorities have responsibilities to the citizenry and those seeking citizenship. So it has a responsibility to welcome the foreigner. This is a very integral element in this section about Catholic social teaching on immigration. So that's important. That's in here in these paragraphs 2234 to 2257. As a matter of fact, trying to make sure I am getting this for you. Yeah, so 2241, very important about paragraph about immigration and our obligation as one of the richer nations to help those who are from the poorer nations or less influential. And then also in that same, right after that, it talks about, when our government authorities who we respect and honor go off the rails. Okay, so once they start going down a path that is against the moral order, we do have a right to resist. We do have a right to say no. Okay, when what they're asking us to do is not aligned with the gospel, which, it's interesting that paragraph comes immediately after the paragraph on immigration, because I think, we Catholics look at immigration in a very interesting way. These are brothers and sisters. We want them, to be safe and welcomed. We want them to contribute clearly to the well-being of the larger community. But first and foremost, we want to recognize them as sons and daughters of God, deserving of our love and support. And very often that puts us at odds with, very restrictive immigration, which clearly has a purpose. It's to safeguard the common good. It's to preserve, economic structures, things of that nature. And these are goods. But I believe the first and foremost good is to the individuals themselves. And hence, it's a big debate in Catholic circles, but, the base teaching is we do have an obligation to help those coming from, less prosperous nations. And we need to put into place systems that can do that in the most just way. And I guess where all debate really comes in is, well, what do those systems look like? And I think you could put 10 Catholics in the room and they could pick 10 different systems, and probably none of them would agree. But as long as we're moving towards a system that is actually morally acceptable, that fosters this type of welcome to the foreigner, I think we're in good shape. Again, interesting note, just reiterating, you should not resist legitimate authority. However, the church does give you some definition on when, you could start to say, wait a second, this authority is no longer legitimately in charge. And it gives you 5 conditions, and they very much parallel something we're going to talk about in a few minutes called just war theory. So there has to be a certain grave, prolonged violation of fundamental rights. Okay. So if that's in place and all other means have been exhausted, and by fighting back, we don't create a worse situation, and there is a good chance that we could be successful in this fight, and we can see no better solution. So it's not as if we have 5 good solutions and we're just choosing to fight because it's the easiest one at hand. We're actually saying we don't even see another solution. In that case, then armed resistance of the authorities, our governmental authorities, is perfectly okay. Okay. And then finally in this section, just talking about honoring mother and father, and by extension, the authorities in our communities at large. It also then just talks about, let's be careful about confusing church and community, church and politics. So church is, very much a player in the moral lives of the citizenry, but the legal, secular lives of the citizenry, that is not the church's role. And we need to make sure that as a church, we don't start to become a political movement, that we talk about the issues as they relate to faith and morals, and make maybe political stance based on that, but not to replace politics, not a politic even in and of itself. And that's an important part of Catholic teaching. The in brief there, 2248. Again, God's willed after him, honor your mother and father and others that are in positions of authority. Christians owe their parents respect, gratitude. You know, parents give us life, and sometimes we can forget that because they didn't give us all the other things that they should have, but they did give us life. Okay, and we have to remember that. Parents have this unbelievable and first responsibility, education your children, 2252. And then 2256, citizens are obliged in conscience not directives authorities when contrary man of the gospel. Okay. And that brings us up to the fifth and final commandment that we're going to cover this week. Respect for human life. So do not kill. Okay. So you shall not kill. And the kill there is really murder. Okay. That's really what we're talking about. All right. And that's because human life is sacred. Okay. Human life is created by God, and God alone is the Lord of life. Only he can take it. And by the way, he can take it anytime he feels like it should be taken, or it's anytime he knows it's best to take it. So, you know, a lot of people are like, well, why did God let that 5-year-old girl die? Well, first off, all life is a gift, even if it's a minute of life. It's a gift that we don't deserve. We did nothing to earn. So any amount of our life is good. Is it tragic that a 5-year-old dies? Well, yes, more so for the parents and family members of the 5-year-old than the 5-year-old itself, because the 5-year-old's probably not completely cognizant of the fact that they could have lived to be 95, or what that actually even means at that point. But you know, quite frankly, God can decide this is enough. This person has done all they need to do. I'm bringing them to me, which is all of our ultimate goals. We don't want to be hanging out here. You know, if God was, if I knew right now that God would say, hey, I take you right now, you're going to heaven, I'm going. Okay. Not even a slight hesitation. I mean, that's ultimately the goal. This is just a gym workout here in this life. So only God can control that. He has the right to control it. And how much or how little of this life we get, that's totally up to him, not us. And we shouldn't begrudge any of it. And we have no authority to take it or alter it for others, which is, you know, supremely important. You know, we have no right to damage, certainly take the life of any innocent human being. Now, it does go in to quite a bit in this section about legitimate defense. So yeah, there's the whole principle of double effect. You're allowed to defend your own life. Matter of fact, you should. To choose not to defend your life is actually not is not respecting God's gift to you. Okay, it's basically saying, I know you gave me this life, but I'm just going to lay down while these people kill me. That's basically saying to God, yeah, I'm not really appreciating your gift. So we should defend ourselves. We have a right to legitimate defense, and sometimes in that right of legitimate defense, we may take another life. Okay. Not that that was our intention. Our intention was to defend our own, but that is legitimate. Okay. Again, and it's a sort of a bend on the law of the principle of double effect. We weren't trying to take the other life. We're trying to defend our own. And in defending of our own, we ended up taking another life in a perfectly reasonable way. And that is okay. Again, that double effect, it's, you know, pretty clear. I think I have another typo, another duplicate. I do. How did I do that? All right, let me fix that. Yeah, sorry about that. So beautiful. This is one of the great things about pre-recording these classes. I catch my typo, so live classes don't have to experience that. But again, legitimate defense is important. I do want to highlight 2267. This is the teaching on the death penalty. And this has changed under Pope Francis, although it's been migrating in this direction really for the last several popes, certainly since Pope John Paul II and then Benedict. They've kind of all moved the ball forward down the field. And Francis is sort of saying, okay, this is what previous popes have been saying. I'm just going to chronicle it in the catechism. And basically what it says, it doesn't say that the death penalty is no longer part of legitimate authority and something that is invalid. That's not what this is actually saying. It's saying, no, it is a legitimate punishment. However, it shouldn't be used if there's other means at your disposal to get the same result. And what the newest version of the catechism is telling us is those means now exist. Okay, we have the ability as industrial societies to incarcerate people forever, and to do so in a safe way to safeguard the public interest. And that's what we should do. It's saying not that the death penalty is no longer valid, it's just no longer necessary, nor is it permissible under the current conditions. Now, if we were to have a societal collapse and our ability to maintain the type of penal systems we have today, deteriorates, well, then things could change again, in which case the death penalty may be the best option and only option available. But just so you know, that teaching has changed. It's tied into this section around legitimate defense because you're defending the lives of other members of society, and it's saying that this is one way to do that. And we're just saying that it's no longer necessary because we have other better ways that still respect human dignity. So that's what the current version of 2267 is talking about. And hopefully you get a chance to take a look at that. And if you have a catechism that's older than 5 or 6 years old, I think you're going to see the old version of 2267, which says basically the same thing, but it says, yeah, but you can still use the death penalty. And now we're saying that no, it's inadmissible. So it's not that it's never allowed, okay, because it could be allowed again in the future, but under current conditions, it's inadmissible and it should be fought against, okay, which is important. So again, a little bit more on that respect for human life in there. Intentional homicide, I think this goes without saying. I think we all know, don't kill people, okay? Don't kill innocent people. And some versions of this are incredibly sinful, like infanticide. Abortion, by the way, that's what abortion is. It's infanticide in a way. Well, it's pre-infanticide. Fratricide, killing your brother. Parricide, killing your parents. Murdering of a spouse. So it's actually even recognizing a gravity of murder, that some murder is worse than other. And I think we can all agree to that sense of gravity as well. Again, has a section here on abortion. Human life must be respected absolutely from the moment of conception. Science tells us, okay, this is not up for debate, by the way, okay? So anyone who tells you, well, we don't know when human life begins, we've known since the mid-1800s. 96% of scientists around the world polled just 2 years ago said the same thing, okay? Human life begins at conception. This is not a debate, okay? This is not a place where you can have an opinion. There is no opinion. This is a fact, all right? So I think that's really important. I am looking at the note here. This has been the teaching of the church forever, and I think the reason I'm highlighting note 75 is note 75 references the Didache. That's a first-century document that says, you shall not kill the embryo by abortion and shall not cause the newborn to perish. So even in the first century, the church teaching from the Didache was no abortion. So a lot of people will claim, well, the Catholic Church has allowed abortion. No, it never has, actually, ever. All right, what the Catholic Church did was not have a full understanding scientifically of when a child became a human being. So, for example, Thomas Aquinas and other thinkers of that late middle age period actually believed that until the child reached quickening, so the first time the mother moved or felt the child move, that child wasn't fully alive. But modern biological sciences, starting way back, as I said, in the mid to late 1800s, taught us that no, now that we have microscopes, we can actually see human life at the microscopic level. and recognize that that is a stage of development of a living, breathing human being. So certainly abortion can never be tolerated. And it's interesting, I just read something really stuck with me. The most dangerous place for a human being on Earth today in the year 2024. So the place where you're most likely to lose your life because of unnatural causes is in the mother's womb, okay? Because of the predominance of abortion and the millions that are killed each year. There's more human beings who die an unnatural death through abortion than all other things combined, wars and natural disasters and crime and all those things. You put them all together and they don't even come close to the danger of death that you face in a mother's womb. So really a sad commentary on where we have come. And that's why abortion, okay, a person that is directly materially involved in an abortion is excommunicated automatically, all right? So it's called excommunication late sentia, and basically it just means that you are excommunicated automatically just by the virtue of what you've done, and there's no canonical process necessary. So we treat it very seriously because it is the most heinous of all heinous of all crimes, the murder of one's child, which is what abortion is. I mean, let's just not sugarcoat it, okay? Unfortunately, our society has tried to cover it in a bunch of other different titles, but that's actually what it is. It's the murder, deliberate killing of an innocent human being who happens to be your child. By the way, men and women are both guilty of that. Right? Euthanasia, equally poor. Thank God, not as devastating as far as the sheer numbers today as abortion, although it's climbing every year. It's getting more and more effective. And it's just unacceptable. And it really means, hey, I'm putting an end to the lives of the handicapped, the sick, or dying people. So people that I no longer believe have any value, or people that have determined themselves that they no longer have any value or anything to contribute. And that is morally unacceptable because human life is of equal dignity at all of its stages and all of its conditions. It doesn't matter what you can and cannot contribute, what your strengths and weaknesses are. You are a human being created in the image and likeness of God. You're infinitely valuable. So direct euthanasia, never allowed, and it's unnecessary. People will claim, well, they're in pain. We have palliative care techniques today that can eliminate that pain and suffering. And the church actually even teaches that, the use of, discontinuing, burdensome medical procedures, that's okay. Okay. So you don't have to do everything possible to keep someone alive, especially if those procedures and those options become burdensome to the individual to whom they're trying to help. And you can even do things like administer, pain reducing and anxiety reducing drugs for the purpose of reducing pain and anxiety. If they have a secondary effect of shortening one's life, that's okay, but that can't be the primary intention. It's got to be a secondary effect at best. But the church teaches that is perfectly acceptable. So people should be clear on what the church teaches in this arena. Suicide, clearly not good. Okay. Our lives are not our own. So God is the owner of our lives. He gave it to us. He chooses when it ends. Again, I love this. We're stewards. We're not owners. It's not our life to dispose of. And, you can make the argument that anyone who chooses this path is suffering from some sort of grave psychological issue, whether it be temporary or longer term. And hence they can't be held fully culpable for their decision. And again, that can be debated. Theologians can debate that till they're blue in the face. The church opens up the door to that and says that it's very possible, if not likely, that anyone going down this path is suffering from some sort of condition that reduces their culpability. But there's no guarantee of that. And just as if there's no guarantee that they're fully culpable, and that's it for them. God can choose to work in very mysterious ways, and we always have to have hope that at the very end, as they're taking that last breath, they realized, what a grave mistake they made, and they repented of that mistake, and God, welcomed them with a warm embrace. That's what we have to hope. Also tied into this is one that we don't really pay that much attention to, but scandal. So a person, you can also call them spirit. One way to do that is through scandal. It's your attitude or behavior lead others down a path of choosing evil. So for example, your acceptance of an evil can actually lead others to believe that it's okay and make that same choice. And this is problematic. And for people that are in positions of authority, they have a greater chance of committing this sin of scandal because they can more easily lead people down a path. So, for example, let's say we had a Catholic president that chose to support unlimited abortion from, conception to birth. That's very scandalous and could lead other Catholics to believe that's okay because, hey, he's the president, he's a man of authority, he knows. That would be an extreme case of scandal that needs to stop. Okay. So again, that's how a good example of how scandal can cause a problem. And if you have a higher position of authority and respect, that you're more likely going to be in a position to lead others down that path and actually commit the sin of scandal, which is damaging people's spiritual life, which is taking their spiritual life in some cases. And then finally, in this section, it talks about how we have an obligation to take care of ourselves. Okay. That's important. We're given our lives, we're given our bodies. We need to keep them in as best a shape as we can, avoid excesses that damage them. So we need to treat the resources we're giving. In this case, God gave us the resource of our physical body as best as we can. And with that, there's a number of things that then go with that. So you have to have respect for the dignity of the bodily integrity of others, which clearly means when we're talking about scientific research, we need to be careful. Okay, there's no such thing as moral neutrality. We need to evaluate the ethics of any sort of research that we're doing. Are we, violating human dignity through doing it? Clearly things that are direct violations of human dignity: kidnapping, terrorism, torture. The big three of amputations, mutilization, sterilization certainly are morally unacceptable, unless they're medically necessary. So amputations, mutation, sterilization, unless those are required to save someone's life, they should not be done. Unfortunately, we've extended that in a weird way in the modern age, especially with the transgender ideology, where we actually are fully accepting amputations of perfectly healthy body parts and both chemical and physical mutilations, and sterilization to actually, in a misguided effort, okay, to save someone's mental life. It's interesting. There's a report that just came out. This is April of 2024. So it just came out in the beginning of April 2024, called the Cass report. It was done out of England. And it totally debunks all of what we've learned, or a great deal of what we learned or thought we learned about transgenderism and what drives it and its dangers and effects and the benefits of transitioning. I really encourage people to read it. The UK government has certainly read it since they commissioned it, and they're making changes to their laws as a result. And being the backward country we are at the moment, it'll probably take us another 10 years to catch up to them. But thank God, governments are now looking at real data and not just conjecture, and they're starting to recognize that what we've done in this area, allowing amputations, mutilations, and sterilizations, is tragic. And unfortunately, millions have been affected, but perhaps millions more won't. Respect for the dead, this extends to that. So certainly respecting the human body in all of its aspects of life, from conception to death, and even in death, making sure we have respect for the body is an important part of Catholic teaching. And then finally, this section talks about safeguarding peace, and this gets us into just war theory and the need to avoid war at all costs. So authorities are really charged with maintaining peace, but all of us, all citizens, all governments have to work towards the avoidance of war as our first and foremost path. However, church does recognize that there are opportunities, being that some people will not work to avoid war, where you will be put in a position where you have to choose self-defense. And just like your own personal self-defense is allowed, national self-defense is also allowed. However, there are some conditions under which we believe that's realistic. And they're very much like the conditions we talked about earlier, in light of geez, what was that? Let me go back to that. I'm trying to remember what that was now. Oh yeah, in light of fighting against political oppression or a authority that's gone off the rails. So very similar rules are required here, and I've gone too far. So let me make sure I get us back. Sorry about that. This is what you have to deal with when you're dealing with me on the recording. So sorry about that. So four very important conditions. So the damage inflicted. So in order to go to war as in defense, so you've been attacked. You had the number one condition is the damage inflicted by the aggressor must be lasting, grave, and certain. So this can't be just someone did something that upset you. This has to be a significant incursion into your national sovereignty. You've taken all other steps and considered all other steps, and they've either proven to be impractical or ineffective in ending this aggression. Number three, you have to have a chance of success. So, if in choosing to say, well, I'm going to defend myself, but you know that you have no chance of winning, and in your defense, you actually could cause yourself more damage, don't do it. Okay. It sucks. You're being destroyed and taken over by an unjust aggressor. But if your defense is going to cause more damage than good for yourself and for others, that makes no sense. And then finally, you have to make sure that your response is proportionate and that you're not going to invoke techniques or weaponry that's going to cause, tremendous evils well beyond what was justified for the initial offense, okay? And this comes into play very much with modern weaponry, where we can wipe out literally millions of people with a push of the button. That may not be proportionate to someone attacking one of our borders. So we have to be careful. And then that gets reiterated just a few paragraphs later in 2314. Any indiscriminate destruction of vast areas, especially where vast areas populated by civilians, that's a crime against God and man. Okay. And again, just references the vast power we have in modern warfare. And generally, countries have been pretty good at not unleashing that power against civilians. However, there's been cases of that, and we in the United States were probably the single largest demonstrable case of that with our bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to population centers. Okay, they were civilian populations. Certainly it was calculated to save more lives than it was to damage, but to attack a civilian population, I think when you're reading 2314, you'd have a hard time justifying that attack, even if the net number of bodies saved was higher. Okay, in brief, 2319, every human life from the moment of conception till death is valuable. Legitimate defense, 2321, very important. And then again, 23, 28, 29, 30, making sure we don't do and choose to use some of these weapons that we have that can cause immense damage to civilian populations, very key. So that's that section, a lot in there. If you think about it, you're talking about number of church precepts are covered in these first five commandments. You're talking about some very important social teachings of the church around immigration and abortion and gender theory. They're covered. Just war, certainly covered. Indiscriminate destruction through advanced weaponry, covered. A lot of Catholic social teaching. Our duty to respect the rights of parents, our duty to respect the rights of other authorities, covered. Our duty to reject those rights when they're abused, also covered. So again, this is a jam-packed section. So I want you to read it. Once you would have reached the 81% mark of reading through the Catechism. So congratulations, we've knocked off another big chunk. For homework, I'd like you to, especially when you read those last couple of sections we just covered, I'd like you to think, and we're talking about this in class 13. Excuse me, sorry about that. I want you to think about the Ukraine-Russian war and the Israel-Hamas wars, of the 2023-2024. So it's current for us today, but this could be watched a few years from now. Do they meet the conditions of just war? So those 4 conditions that were laid out, 4 or 5 conditions, are they in place? Was there just reason there, and did that just reason extend through the whole war, or was it maybe there at one point and not there later? I'd like you to think about it. I'd like you to read a handout I'm giving. It's also going to be out in the share for those of you that are watching this. The Popes and the Moral Revolt Against Nuclear Weapons. I think it will give you an eyeful of what our church leaders at the highest levels have thought about nuclear weaponry and its use. And then I'd like you to really actually consider the United States use of the atomic bomb in World War II. Was that aligned with CCC 2314? Or did we violate a significant element of the moral code? And I would argue that we did, but I'm just one person. Okay. I'd like you to think about it. I can understand the arguments for the use of the bomb. I think there were calculations done that said a land invasion would have resulted in the deaths of a couple of million people. So in retrospect, if you're just doing proportionality, if you're a proportionalist, which by the way, the church does not support, okay, you would say, well, I'm willing to sacrifice 500,000 to save 2 million. That's proportional moral thinking, totally against the church's view on how moral thinking should work. But, you guys decide for yourself. I've given you some opinions, and I do think there can be a good argument. And theologians have been making this argument, so I like to see how we do with it. Theologians making this argument since those bombs were dropped, and you'll find some pretty high hitters or heavy hitters on both sides of this argument. So this is not one that's a slam dunk in either direction. Hopefully this was useful, helped you get through this section so you understand where we're at, and also now as you go back and review it, it'll solidify some of those teachings in your mind. And let us end in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, thank you as always for all your great gifts. Thank you for the gifts of the Catechism. Thank you for your commandments and their extension and the great thinking that's been done and to what they mean for our lives today. We ask that you allow us to embrace church teaching in these areas, and that you give us the strength and the ability to share that teaching with others. We ask this in your holy name. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, folks. I appreciate your time and effort, and I look forward to seeing you soon.